Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm excited to welcome back Mr. Mark Sleboda, International Affairs and Security Expert. So, Mr. Sleboda, once again, thank you for your time and welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on India's Global Impulse.
Thank you, sir. So, I would like to start by asking you about Operation Spiderweb and how Russia will react to it, since there have been multiple speculations about how Russia will retaliate. So, it will be best to get your insights on this, sir.
Sure. So, Operation Spiderweb was an asymmetric warfare attack performed by the Kiev regime uh, inside Russia. It utilized about 120, 117, I think to be exact, small FPV drones that were hidden within a number of containers, like cargo containers on the backs of trucks. And in fact, in one instance, one video I saw, it involved small mobile prefabricated homes that were the same size as a standard truck container unit. This operation was evidently, we are told by the Kiev regime, in the works for some 18 months. There was a Ukrainian agent sympathizer who set up a private trucking company, distribution company in Russia, a year and a half ago. And there's an open question whether the drones were smuggled in to Russia completed, or whether they were actually assembled at this company's headquarters as well. I've heard contradictory reports on that, so that's not clear. But first of all, it has to be said that it's very hard for Russia to intercept everything that comes across the border, particularly from the new Russian territories in the Donbass, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. There are millions of Ukrainians or former Ukrainians living and working in Russia. There were millions of Ukrainians living and working in Russia before 2022, right? Are even more Ukrainians. Some of them now identify as Russian and have Russian passports. Others don't. But there are still large numbers, millions of Ukrainians living and working in Russia. That is a tall order for Russia's internal security services to assess and filtrate and stop everything that comes across this enormous borders. And they generally do a pretty good job, right? I'm constantly reading about in the Russian media. It doesn't make the Western media that often, but I am constantly reading about the FSB or the Russian border service foiling this plot and that plot and that plot, usually several times a week. However, this one was elaborately prepared and certainly got through. So it has to be said, clear Russian intelligence failure, right? If this was in the work for 18 months and Russia didn't get word of it, that's bad, because earlier in the conflict and for the last decade plus, Russia has had very good human intelligence, much less signals intelligence and everything else in Ukraine. It means that their intelligence doesn't have the access and the penetration that they once had, right? I.e., I would suggest that a rather large number of Russian agents, sleeper agents, informants, sympathizers, have been removed at this point, at the third year, going fourth year of the war. Intelligence failure. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, these cargo containers, they went to 5 separate far-flung air bases in Russia. One in the far north in Murmansk, 2 in central Russia, 1 in Siberia, 1 in the Amur, and 1 in the far east. when these cargo containers, in I believe every case, the drivers had no idea what was in that they were containing. They were simply told to go to a certain location somewhere not a terribly great distance from these bases, right? And then they were told that they would be met there. There is very likely there were more such trucks and containers that were stopped from reaching and performing the destination. We know that one driver started to get suspicious and came around to inspect his cargo on his truck, and that's when the Kiev regime self-detonated, used some kind of self-destruct device to prevent that. It has to be said that there have been a number of previously a number of very odd Kiev regime drone attacks previously in Murmansk and in other, shall we say, distant locations in Russia where it is hard to see how they managed to perform those drone attacks since they were too far from the contact line. And there has been speculation that in some of those cases, the drones might have been fired from Finland, from the Baltics, even from within Kazakhstan. And that still remains possible. But we also knew, as of just over a week before Operation Spiderweb, it was uncovered a truck within Russia carrying FPV drones, right, that were to be used, not on Operation Spiderweb, but on another attack. So it became clear then already before Operation Spiderweb was enacted that in other instances, the Kiev regime was essentially doing the same thing on a smaller and less dramatic scale, and that had been uncovered on at least one occasion. But that, didn't avert what happened last week or earlier this week, I guess. And it has to be said that there were a number of escalations all within 24 hours of each other. There was blowing up of two bridges, several bridges in the Belgorod and the Kursk regions in Russia by sabotage groups. That's fair, right? Blowing up bridges is part of war, right? Both sides have blown up dozens of bridges. If it was just bridges, that would be a legitimate military target. They had dual use. Yes, they were civilian bridges, but they were also providing logistics for Russia's expansion of their buffer zone into the Sumy region after pushing the Kiev regime's incursion, their Fool's Crusade incursion out of Kursk. But in one of those instances, the bridge was specifically blown up when a civilian passenger train was moving over the bridge, which resulted in a large number of injuries and deaths. That is not a legitimate military target. That is an act of terrorism. And I haven't seen any really argument. Even in the Western press, they just avoid mentioning that at all. So the other attack that occurred in the same 24 hours was a renewed attack on the Crimean Bridge involving maritime and perhaps submersible drones. The attack did no damage at all to the Crimean Bridge itself. It did some damage to protective barriers and before the bridge. And then some of the debris fell down on top of the bridge and they had to clear it before traffic was cleared, but it was a few hours. But through a combination of Russia's air defense, electronic warfare, and counter drones, I saw one video of a Russian Lancet loitering munition being used to destroy one of the Kiev regime's maritime surface drones or unmanned boats as it was heading towards the Crimean Bridge. So this was meant to be one part of a coordinated series of attacks. Destruction of bridges with killing of civilians, an attack on the Crimean Bridge. I guess there was some hope that it could have had some success, and this Operation Spiderweb. obviously meant to be a huge narrative game changer. This was the intention, right? The Kiev regime has throughout this conflict fought the narrative war far more assiduously and far more effectively than they fought the actual war on the battlefield. And the target of this is not only the morale of their own people, but the political elites and support in the Western countries as well. And they could, I guess, hope to have a negative effect on the Russian citizenry's morale, although, and maybe invoke some type of political crisis in Russia. But if that was the hope, well, not at all. In fact, if anything, the opposite has occurred. So Operation Spiderweb was the third part of this, 24 hours of escalation and provocations. And in at least 3 of the bases defenses, right, their air defenses, their electronic warfare, stopped everything. There was no damage done by the drones. On 2 of the bases, the defenses were less effective. Now, initially, the Kiev regime claimed that some 40 aircraft were damaged or destroyed in these 2 successful attacks. That has been walked way back, way back. In even the U.S. in the Washington Post reported in the last 48 hours that the U.S. intelligence assessment is that perhaps up to 20 aircraft were damaged and maybe 10 destroyed. The Russian estimates are actually much lower, and Russian analysts have raised the possibility that actually some of the aircraft targeted were not operational aircraft. They are old aircraft that were essentially spare parts planes. And so that may have been some of them. But my guess would be that single digits, right? Something less than 10 of aircraft were damaged or destroyed, and some of those damaged ones can probably be repaired. Now, the important thing is the aircraft that were targeted. These were Russia's strategic air bases. They targeted Russian strategic, that is, nuclear carrier assets. In particular, the Tupolev 95, the Tu-95, and also some Tupolev 22s. And they also tried to attack some Russian reconnaissance planes, rough equivalents of like an AWACS aircraft. Although from what I've heard, that wasn't actually that didn't actually happen. That wasn't effective, but it's been reported. It wasn't reported initially. So the majority of the damaged and destroyed were Tupolev 95s. Now, Tupolev 95s are an older aircraft. They're similar in some respects to the B-52. You know, they're shall we say, a legacy bomber. They're not being produced anymore. Russia has some, I believe, in excess of 120 of them, but only 50 to 60 of them are kept operational at any one time. Others are in reserve. They potentially could be repaired and returned to service. They are part of Russia's nuclear triad. They probably the weakest part of Russia's nuclear triad, to be fair. Russia's submarine fleet and its intercontinental ballistic missiles are much more modernized and formidable. Russia is building new strategic bombers. They're in the development and production phase, but they're a lot like the US, who is also trying to do the same thing. They're not there yet. So there's a gap, right, where no new bombers are being produced and the new model isn't done yet, which is a problem that the United States also continually has as it's trying to modernize older weapons. However, the Tupolev is also used to fire cruise missiles, the KH-101 cruise missiles, and they are regularly used to fire cruise missiles in this conflict. So there is an immediate, shall we say, legitimate reason for the Kiev regime to try to strike these, because they are being used to launch cruise missiles at their country. However, it is my firm belief, and every analyst that is not a Western propagandist that I have talked to, no one believes that the Kiev regime could have carried out this attack on their own. Simply, the scale, the planning, and the logistics of the operation, but more importantly, the satellite data, the very active, and immediately before the actual attack, there would have to have been updates made, because these bombers are regularly rotated between Russia's strategic air bases, and they had to have the exact targeting information within 24 hours, essentially, to be able to successfully conduct these attacks. And we know that U.S. military satellites, U.S. military Topaz military satellites, were spending an inordinate amount of time focusing on one or two of these bases that was detected right before these attacks took place, in particular the Olenya base in Murmansk. So there's a question. Russia's nuclear triad was attacked, right? Now, this is a big thing. This is a red line of red lines. First of all, because it's a nuclear state, all right, and it's part of their nuclear triad. Secondly, there are existing treaties. It was initially put into the SALT Treaty and then updated with the New START, that the U.S. and Russia are supposed to keep their respective bombers on invisible sight on open tarmacs, so that they can be viewed by the other side with their satellites as part of transparency and the nuclear arms control architecture. So with that, of course, goes a kind of guarantee that the other state is not attacking and will not attack the other state's nuclear assets, because they're providing each other basically with the information, with the ability to observe those, right, as part of preventing a nuclear conflict. This would be a huge U.S. betrayal of this. Now, Russia has suspended active participation in the New START Treaty, and mentioning that exactly some things like this made little sense when they are in an armed conflict that the U.S. is engaged with them in at whatever fig leaf of removal level. So there's a question of whether Russia should have been adhering to it. There's an ongoing debate within Russia that why weren't these bombers kept in hardened shelters, right? We have seen multiple bases. It's been brought home already that because of asymmetric attacks like this, that no air base in Russia is, completely outside of the reach of the Kiev regime. Not on a systemic and regular basis, but with these type of one-off shots, these aircraft are too expensive and too valuable not to be protected. Whether, there's a question of an old Cold War era treaty with the United States or not. But it is the Russian military's view, the Russian intelligence services, that the United States and I think the assessment, the United Kingdom were involved in this, which means that this was a huge new escalation by the Trump administration against Russia